Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming to this session. Thank you to the BCS for hosting it. This is a great event, this Lean Kanban Day. I've come to all of them, spoken at the last two. I'm a bit adrift today because I don't have anyone with me to talk with, and normally I've managed to corral somebody into talking with me, and it always generally goes better. So the kind of background to this talk is a year ago I became CTO of a startup and found that I was using Kanban for more than I had been doing previously, looking kind of outwards across the organisation, but also because it's a small startup and I'm a hands-on CTO, so I still do a lot of programming, looking kind of down into the stack as well. And it was the sort of the learnings from that kind of prompted this talk. So before we start, I'd like to get an understanding of your background, where you're from. Could you raise your hand if you're involved in managing software delivery in any way? Okay, and is there anyone, and then raise your hand if you're involved in if you write code for a living. Okay. And then if you're in some kind of OPSI role. Okay, so that's good. So there's a good mix. There's a good mix. Exactly. That's what I do. So, so the sort of hypothesis of the talk, and hopefully we'll sort of test it in the course of this talk as to whether that hypothesis holds, is that the fundamental principles that Kanban's based on, you find all the way down the stack. I tried to illustrate this with this fractal. It's all very 80s, very Amiga, but it's that as you go down the stack, you find the same rules apply, or the same kind of tools and kind of metrics can be used and are useful all the way down. And we're going to look at how you can benefit from essentially Kanbanizing your software development in the way that with enterprise service planning you go out and Kanbanize the organisation. We're going to look the other way down into the software and look at the benefits of Kanbanizing the software. We're going to look at the value of the metrics that you use to do this, but also the limitations and some of the pitfalls of there are some issues around using metrics, and there's issues around how you respond to those metrics and work with those metrics. So we'll explore those a bit as well. And at the end, we'll come back up to the business, up to the reason that the software development was kicked off in the first place, why that activity is going on, and look at how having this kind of Kanbanized, instrumented view down into the stack is actually beneficial when you come back up. So I've got a question for you guys, and do you know, it wasn't the clicker that wasn't working, it was PowerPoint itself by the looks of it. Oh, your PowerPoint is dead. Oh no, it's not. It's back in the room. Great. So who would like to hazard a guess as to what these people are doing?
Having a good time.
Having a good time. Yes, that's important actually. You know, some nice sort of culturally sort of generally happy environment. Anything else? No guesses at all.
Script writing.
There is some script writing, but maybe not the scripts you're thinking of. There's some Ruby scripts being written. There's a clue.
Some sort of hack event.
It's not bad. This is a day in the office where we're working now at Honeycomb TV, which is the company that I'm the CTO for. So this is our head of design, this is our head of product, and this is two of our developers. I've got a question for you now. I'd like you, if in twos, could you spend a couple of minutes just talking about and thinking about coming up with some ideas of how you might be able to measure the work that they're doing. So they're involved in the production of software. And how might you go about measuring that? And if you take a couple of minutes on that, and then I'll take some ideas from the floor. So if you confer with your person next to you, let's come back to
We could go on humorous response of lines up code and how many hours there were.
Depends how when I get
it's a bit difficult knowing more of what they do. What is the need there to fulfill? I don't know. It's a hard response to give, isn't it? Writing something. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so again, you know what the product is, so how well are they even if you don't know what it is. Something about to produce something, working software.
So how do I create a changes? That's why I need to you're not doing it alone. You have to use it.
Okay, so who would like to volunteer a way that we make? Yeah, you sir.
We know the answer. It's lines of code, right?
Lines of code. So lines of code. Any advance on lines of code? Semicolons. Okay. So apart from lines of code and semicolons, any ideas how we might measure the performance of these guys here? Coffee drinks per day.
User stories.
User stories. So user stories. So what are these stories doing?
So maybe not necessarily user stories, but stories, which is a task which will take a programmer 2 days at the first guess, and give or take in the range of order of magnitude.
So is it the output of user stories that we're talking
Yeah,
about?
we were talking about that problem as well, in terms of that user story points or story count is no value element to it, and it needs to be something above it values.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
The amount of customers that we're acquiring and the amount of that we're turning into revenue and the acceleration of that.
I love it. So we've got some output, some metrics around output, some metrics around outcome. The critical thing is we've got some metrics. So we are making some kind of effort to get visibility of this. But otherwise, it does look like a hackathon, which is great. I mean, to me, that's fantastic. If our kind of working office life is like a hackathon, and well, if people enjoy hackathons, I think they're held to be sort of interesting things, then that's good. But yes, you need some kind of metrics. And in terms of the point about the outcomes, the outcome they're working to is, this is what our business does. Our business moves video files around. So we take videos from post-production agencies and we get them to broadcasters, and we do various things with them on the way. So we have both an outcome which is measurable, which is the number of successfully delivered videos, the customer churn rate, customer recommendation, things like that. But we also have some metrics around how we're building the software that substantiates that. And an idea for how you measure that, or kind of how you can characterize that, which can then be used elsewhere in the business. I stole from this guy. Does anyone know who this guy is? Carl Scotland, the one and only Carl Scotland. So I was lucky enough to work with Carl at the BBC about 15 years ago, and he's the person I regularly check in with to kind of to see if there's a bandwagon I should be jumping on, or to see that's not what I mean. To see kind of where sort of thinking in the management space is. I'm indebted to him and kind of owe a lot to him in terms of informing the way I approach management. And did anyone see this talk he did at Lean Kanban Central Europe last year? I urge you to check out the video. It's very good. He was talking about Hoshin Kanri, or strategy deployment, and it's really about how it's kind of it's kind of analogous with enterprise service planning, in that it's looking at the whole of the organization and looking at how you can, rather than, if you've got, it talks about how sort of lean initiatives can fail or kind of falter if they're just focused on one particular function. So maybe they come into technology and they optimize technology delivery, but then they don't really have much impact beyond that, because the rest of the organization is still run along, say, command and control lines, or is run according to sort of management methodologies which don't match with that. He recommended a couple of books. This is impossible. This is like trying to read Finnegan's Wake. This is absolutely fantastic, getting the right things done. It's like reading The Goal. Has anyone read The Goal? Fantastic. I absolutely love The Goal. And this is very much in the same way. It's kind of like, it's a business novel, which I think is a really underrated genre, the business novel. And one of the ideas that comes out, it says this character in it called John Carus, and he's not he doesn't kind of demand things of people, but he does. There are a few things where he has some expectations, and one of his expectations is that everyone in the company, every leader in the company, from team leaders to directors, needs to know, and these are the metrics that he used, and these are the metrics that I use for measuring what those guys at the table were doing: capacity, throughput, and cycle time. They also need to know what's working and what's not working. So an idea of kind of whether things are functioning correctly. Are you generating failure demand? Are you actually building a working product? Sir?
Difference between capacity and throughput?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? I mean, I suppose I would take that to mean the throughput is the rate at which stuff is delivered, and the capacity is in this case the number of people in the team or the number of machines you might have for say something like rendering files. I mean, but it's a good point. One maybe to discuss over coffee afterwards.
Just it says his or her, so
Yeah.
Do you maximum and actual?
Do you know what? I hadn't picked up on that nuance, but it's a very good one, and I will save that for later. So I really like this idea of zone control because it's something that I find, as I say, in my role as CTO, that I find asking other people, I present and say, this is how I can give you an idea of when I think this thing is going to be built, or this is how many people I think I need to hire. So, we're aiming to launch something in June. I've done some forecasting based on some historic data around what our throughput's going to be like. I've looked at what the uplift's going to need to be to hit that date, and we've done a hiring drive to address that, taking Brooks' law into account to add some kind of drag to that. But I'm kind of trying to sort of show rather than tell and say these are the metrics I use. This is the way I give visibility of what I'm doing. If I have a dependency on you, so if say marketing, I have a dependency on the design of a website which my team is then going to build, or recruitment, and you have a dependency on hiring new people. Please come in. Then how can I tell what that is? How can you give me the visibility of your zone control? And you kind of, again, I said this is kind of analogous to ESP. I don't, for 1 minute, profess to be an ESP expert at all. I saw a great talk Dave Anderson did on this at Barclays earlier towards the end of last year. And the thing that really came out of it for me was this idea that you've got these observable capabilities which can be sort of balanced against demand, but you also have a recognition of dependencies. And if there are things outside of the area that you've Kanbanized, again, this comes back to this idea that if you've got a lean initiative that just optimizes software delivery, but everything else is run around lines where it's kind of, we're going to plan for the next 6 months, or we don't manage any kind of sort of capacity or capability management, then you're going to kind of come unstuck. So you've got to sort of think of these things in their totality. And something that's kind of useful and can be picked up by people to get going and to help give this kind of visibility of zone control is the limiting of WIP and the visualization of that limiting of WIP. And that's become the idea of limiting WIP or managing WIP to enable flow has become kind of a sort of fundamental for me, and it's something that I almost do without thinking now. So I was very interested to go to the Pipeline conference earlier in the year. Did anyone go to Pipeline? It's fantastic. It's a really good conference. It's organised by the Skelton Thatcher guys, and it's a continuous delivery conference. And Jez Humble was talking at it, and he was essentially giving a kind of expose on the state of DevOps report, which comes out once a year. They do this fantastic survey. He talked a lot about how they do the survey, how they ensure the survey actually has kind of testable value, the kind of statistical models they do, all fascinating stuff. And this year they included in it some questions about Lean, questions about the adoption of Lean. I think there's a huge overlap between DevOps and Kanban. To me, they're so fundamentally on the right track together. And I really kind of encourage the kind of cross-fertilization between the two communities. So he's split, right, so we know managing WIP is important, right? And as I say, it comes from this State of DevOps report. If you get nothing else of value from this talk, I'd recommend downloading the State of DevOps report. It's a free download. You do have to give an email address to Puppet Labs, but hey, that's what Gmail is for. And there's some good stuff in there. So one of the findings from this was that, and I nearly fell off my chair when he said this, managing WIP, there's no correlation between WIP and IT performance. Well, there's negligible correlation between WIP and IT performance. I thought, how can that be? I've worked in teams where I've seen the benefit of managing WIP. I've seen the way it prompts people to make decisions about what priorities are, think about scheduling. it reduces context switching. It's you know, they've seen these tangible benefits. So why should this be? And the way he answered it was very interesting. He said it's and this is taken out of the report. It works, but it works in consort with other things. It works when you have the effective lit limits that drive process improvement, and the use of visual displays to monitor quality, productivity, and work in process, and the use of apps and infrastructure monitoring tools to make business decisions. And that's really the kind of the sort of meat of this talk, is about how by putting in the infrastructure monitoring, by visualizing that, you've then got some fantastic mechanisms for both addressing the sort of zone control issue of quality, so knowing when things don't work, so you can respond to them and fix them quickly, or knowing where where there are quality issues which you can then address so that they disappear from the system, but also giving you keys as to what you should build next. So getting some indications of how might the software tell you what's important to the business, or the software might tell you how choosing what to develop next can help the business. So let's get back to these guys. So this team, so I already called out who they are. So we've got Andrew Fox, our head of design, David Krebin and George Maguire, our developers, and Ben Smith, our head of product. And they're not the whole team. We also have been very fortunate in being able to pull in from outside. Again, this is another lean thing, the idea of pulling in a capability when you need it. We pulled in the expertise of Skelton Thatcher. Has anyone come across Skelton Thatcher before? These guys are amazing. They are absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love them. They're an absolute joy to work with. They had a company. There's only two of them. They had a company outing to see Motorhead. That's how much. That gives you an idea of their kind of where they're coming from. So they organised the London Continuous Delivery Meetup, which again is a really, really good one to go to, because again you get a lot of kind of lean thinking there. They organised the Pipeline Conference, and we brought them in when I joined Honeycomb a year ago. I brought them in because I needed somebody to help me with infrastructure issues. I knew that was beyond my ability. I needed somebody that could pull in and help me with that. So a bit like somebody getting out their homework and sort of showing it to the teacher, I showed them the architecture diagram, and it's nothing really exciting. It's a fairly sort of standard, end-tiered architecture, and I was expecting we were going to have a conversation about deployment or maybe kind of sort of penetration testing or something like that. And what Matthew Skelton said to me, which really made me feel like I was kind of the most naive person in the world, he says, that doesn't really help me because I can't really see the flow. I said, I can't really see what this is doing or where the demand's coming from and how it's supposed to respond to that. I thought that's the sort of thing I would say. But because I kind of gone into this sort of software architecture and sort of deployment and infrastructure mode, I'd kind of left my sort of lean thinking behind. So we threw this away and instead came up with a very simple diagram. It's a bit more complicated than this in production, but I've simplified it for the purposes of the talk. That essentially we have videos that come in and they go through 4 processes. They're ingested, transcoded, packaged, and delivered. And because each of those stages is a capacity-constrained resource, each of them has a queue upstream of them. So we're already getting into familiar territory. We're already getting into the kind of things we see on the Kanban board, and we can already start thinking about some of the Kanban metrics. So we can start thinking about throughput, we can start thinking about cycle time, and we can also start thinking about failure rate. We can see kind of whether we have misqueued items and so on and so forth. The net result of the engagement with Skelton Thatcher and building out the infrastructure was that we now have this, which is our production system that's handling sort of thousands of files a day, going through it for various UK broadcasters, and we can see here's the night time when nothing happens. Here's a ramp up over the day. We have alarms that go off if some of these queues go over a certain length, which is a cue to tell you either something might be wrong or that there's some extra infrastructure that needs to be spun up. And this was the outcome. This is where we got to. What I'm going to do now is just dig in a bit into how we built this, and kind of sort of hopefully give you some useful ideas about how you might instrument your own software. Of those people who do sort of write code for a living or involved in software. How many of you are involved in the instrumentation of that software? And what kind of, what sort of, so you guys at the back there, what things do you get out of the instrumentation?
They don't have much at this stage, we're just trying out various things, but they are visualizing what queues we've got.
Brilliant. It's so worth doing, and it's a really it's effort. It's again coming back to the so your point about user stories and user stories as a measure of going through things. Scale and Factory have a fantastic idea of operation stories, and they say, okay, you've got your user stories that might be what your customer use, but what about your ops stories? So the guy who's on point for, or the girl who's on point for being hit by the pager in the middle of the night to say the system is down. How are they going to be? How is what you're building going to help them? How are they going to respond to that? And it's reserving capacity to devote some of your throughput to the building of those operation features is becoming, to me, as this platform grows and we have to manage its robustness, it's fundamental to building effective working software. So again, maybe that answers your point, sir, about the capacity throughput thing. Maybe if it's the sort of the reservation of capacity for certain functions. I don't know, maybe that still sounds like a coffee conversation. So I'll give you a quick tour of how it goes. I see 20 minutes. Very good. So, as I say, this is not a complex system. It's all kind of commodity stuff. So it's a Rails application. Is anyone familiar with Rails?
Yeah.
And we use Rescue as our back end for queues. So, looking at this here, what is this telling people? What decisions might we be able to make as a result of seeing this? Anyone? Very little.
Who does what next?
Who does what next? How might that help? How might we tell that? Yeah. So it's a pretty hopeless visualization. It doesn't do us much use. On the other hand, what about that? Does that look familiar to anyone? What is that? Bingo. So it's a cumulative flow diagram, and all we've done for that is we've taken Rescue, so the data that's in here, we've pumped it through collectd. Who's familiar with collectd? It's one of the great Unix wrappers. Then we put it into hosted Graphi, and we also use Grafana to present the graphs. I didn't have to write a line of code to get from here to here. It's all configuration, and we use Ansible to stick the configuration onto the boxes. But immediately we can see things backing up. We can see where we might have bottlenecks, and we can use that to inform decisions about how we might then either work on our infrastructure or work on our code to address that. So the promised live demo. Now this is where I'm very much hoping that we're all embracing the idea of a safe-to-fail environment, because if the wheels fall off this, I'm hoping that it will be treated in the spirit that it's done. So, sorry?
A learning opportunity.
A learning opportunity. There we are. Fantastic, sir. So let me just whack the. Let's see if I can whack the font size up on this because it's looking pretty terrible on there. Because I have no idea how to do that on this. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into that rescue screen we saw before, and we have no workers here. So this is the magician's equivalent of the sort of nothing up my left sleeve, nothing up my right sleeve.
Worker in this context.
Oh, very good. So a worker is something that can process jobs. So the jobs that demand, the jobs come in. They are those four coloured circles I had before. There's an ingest worker, a transcode worker, a packaging worker, and a delivery worker. So those workers get spun up, and then they sit waiting, listening to their queues, waiting for work to come in.
So it's like a worker thread.
Well, it's not necessarily a thread because it could be a separate process, or it could be it's a process, or it could be it's a process. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to spin the workers up with the imaginatively named start workers script. And as that's going, we should see the workers start to appear here. So 0 of 6 workers working, and they'll start to appear up to 9 now. And we've got our various workers all sitting ready for the work to come in. And then we will actually send some work in. So for that, I just go onto the Rails console and give this a name, BCS demo, and then I'm going to put 20 pieces of work into the system, like that. So we've created 20 jobs, and they've now been put into the first queue in the system, and we'll see that appear here. So we can see there's 18 jobs now in the queue, two are being processed. Now there's a bit of a lag for, if I just make this so it'll fit on the screen. So this was the trial runs I was doing before today. Sorry, before this morning. So there's a bit of a lag before the stuff appears in here. So while that's doing that, I'm going to talk about another way that we sort of instrument and another way that we get a Kanban metric out of the system. So did anyone go to QCon this year? So it was really, there were some really interesting talks. It was the first time I'd been. It was great fun. And Stephen Godwin from BBC was talking about iPlayer. He was talking about how the iPlayer architecture, it's lots of services joined together by queues. And as these queues do things, so here's something where this is the time addressable media store. I have no idea what it does, but well, I know that it receives requests, finds chunks, creates files, and the file is then complete. The critical thing is that here, as this process runs, it's sending out logging all the time, saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, and it's putting timestamps on it. And because you've got timestamps against that, you have all the data you need to start doing cycle time analysis. Now, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about this here, because bluntly, we're only starting to roll this out ourselves. But when I saw the iPlayer talk, I immediately, an alarm bell rang, because I thought, this is what Skelton Thatcher told us to do. So we had started to build this in, and for that we use a service called log entries. So I'm just going to see if I can make this legible. Not really, no. Let's try and see if it'll go up a bit more. This really is illegible, isn't it? No, I can't see anything. So what log entries does is it takes the logs that your system generates, and you can then track when certain things are here. So I've created this. This is from when I was doing the rehearsal. I had a unique ID for all my jobs that started with this res identifier. So for the BCS demo that I've just put in, if I search for that prefix now, we should so we're starting to see some data appear. So just after 3:10, we start to see some data here. So you can look at the first event and the last event, and that's your cycle time. And you can start doing interesting things with that. So you can couple the cycle time metrics that you get from analyzing your logs. You also get metrics about whether things are working or not, which is great for doing your zone control, what's working, what's not working. But you can combine it with the data that's going into Graphite, Grafana to here we are. So we're starting to see that cumulative flow diagram start out there. And if I change the time down to 15 minutes, we'll see, we should start to see, we've got this is a queue of work starting to build up here, and we've got another queue starting to build up here. So I'll let that run a little bit longer and just go back to the presentation. So the way we make this work, the way we ensure that the start and end events appear in the logs, is and this is so again to your point, sir, this is a user story. This is a user story, but it's not for any customer. This is a user story for the ops team. This is a user story that says that it logs the start and end time for a job, and that's basically making these operational things first-class citizens and saying this is building quality in. This is stuff that you need to consider if you want to build software that works. I'm quite sort of passionate about this now, and about when I'm speaking with other with other members of the business, particularly product managers, about where they want their product dollars spent, then spending a considerable, it's probably about 30%, I would say. 30% of our capacity probably goes on these sort of stories, the stories around building the internal robustness of the product. How am I doing for time?
Yeah, we're going to go till 25 past for officially ending.
So we've got about 5 minutes.
But we
Okay.
started late, so.
Okay. Now, as this builds up and we see data coming in, what we can see here is, well, who would like to tell me what's happening here at the bottom half of the graph there? If this were if this were a piece of sort of software delivery work and you saw this in your cumulative flow diagram, what would you think?
Increasing work in progress, no deliveries.
Exactly. So it's flatlining. Now, who would like to guess why that might be? Or who would like to, not even guess, who would like to offer a suggestion as to why that might be?
Missing a worker?
We're not missing a worker. We could add more workers if we wanted, but we're not missing a worker. But
The workload is not evenly distributed.
the workload is evenly distributed. It's a very simple, queuing discipline. We're not doing anything fancy there. Anything else?
And the one that you ingested, there's nothing else to ingest?
No, there's plenty to ingest. We're emptying out this is what we had to ingest. We're emptying that out, and here's where we're queuing, waiting for this.
So the packaging thing, the last bit.
Yeah.
The orange process is the bottleneck, or it doesn't have enough capacity.
Exactly. So the orange process has become the bottleneck. The reason it has is because of something we're not measuring. And the thing we're not measuring, well, we are, I was just not keeping it on the screen, is this is another queue. So this queue is the queue for, this is data waiting to be written to a disk. So this is a free metric that the Linux operating system will give you. That is essentially we've got all of those worker processes that are all trying to do the same I/O operation, and it's a very for the purposes of the demo, all it is if I just come out of here and do ps aux pipe grep dd, we can see that's what they're doing. They're all hammering the disk. They're all hammering the same disk. So this is to illustrate where you can have all the instrumentation and all the metrics you like about a piece of work, but if there are other dependencies or if there are shared dependencies that you don't have visibility of, then you can very well be spending your time looking for the wrong problem. I found this in the management of software, and I found it in the development of software. There's a lot of investigation required to find the source of problems, and assuming that the problem is somewhere where it isn't can be a source of considerable friction. And there's a great story from one of my favourite books on software development management that kind of attests to that. So this is when this comes back up. This is our hidden dependency. This is our capacity constrained resource that when you're just using the machine as is, you don't know this is here. You have to explicitly say, I'm going to start logging this information, and I'm going to look at it over time, and I'm going to correlate it with the activity that I'm interested in, and I'm going to make what is an invisible dependency visible, and then I can start managing that, and then I can start making decisions about, okay, what do I need here? Do I need maybe to put in an IOPS provision disk, or do I need to look at breaking those workers, removing this dependency, stopping these workers from all trying to hammer the same bit of disk, which is actually that's what we did in real life. There's a fantastic story in this book. Has anyone read this book, Debugging the Development Process? Again, thoroughly recommend this. It's kind of like an Old Testament book. It's from before Agile was named. It's from the early 90s. There's so much that's good in here. There's so much that's about the sort of lean principles. And one of the points that he talks about is bad intelligence. So this bad intelligence is where when they were building Microsoft Word for Windows 1. So this gives you an idea of how old this is, but it's still true. There was Word, and Word used a dialog manager library. So you have this dependency between these two components. And these two components were built by two teams. The Word team, was saying, this is too slow, we can't use this, we can't ship this product with this. They were going around bad-mouthing this around Microsoft and saying, don't use this dialog manager library, you know, it's terrible. So a real cause of kind of sort of upset and friction within Microsoft. The actual issue turned out, after Steve Maguire dug in and looked at the problem, was absolutely nothing to do with the dialog manager. There was instrumentation around this, there was instrumentation around this. The instrumentation around this appeared to point the finger here, so blaming others before properly understanding a thing, never a good idea. It was a problem because the Microsoft Word team had put in what they thought was an optimization that actually threw out what it considered to be unnecessary code. So the dialog manager would be doing work, would be setting threads off, and then the winner Word would say, hang on a minute, we don't need this, throw it out. And so it would slow the whole thing down again. So it is the living embodiment of software of a local optimization, and one that was kind of, because it was in this team and because it was not clearly visible for this team in the way they were instrumenting their software, they couldn't see it. So the kind of point there is that with all your instrumentation, with all your metrics, however good your metrics are, and I think this applies to software development, managing of software development and the software itself, it's never the whole story. And it's, you know, when we're working in complex adaptive systems, we have loads of data, but we also have incomplete data, and we don't have complete visibility of what's going on. And it's always good to have conversations with people and seek to understand things better. So we come back to this team. I'm nearly out of time, so I'm just going to finish by saying the final point I wanted to make is this stuff is not just about building robust systems that work. That is important, and that does affect the value of the business and the value of the software to the business, because, you know, systems that are up and are delivering for your customers are part of what makes the business work. But they can also inform decisions the business makes. So this is taken from our production system. We do not have very much activity during the night. So we look at the queue length, and we use the queue length as an indicator to spin down unused AWS infrastructure. So we can use that to make decisions about how to save money. We could equally, and this is something we've entertained, say, well, we're not using this capacity then. We've got an option here. We can either save some money, or is there another type of demand that we could service with that capacity? Could we keep the capacity up, and could we maybe do batch conversions of things for people? So by looking at the metrics and looking at both where potential problems are and potential opportunities are, then you can inform what Mary Poppendick raises as being the second key constraint on software development, which is knowing what to build. So by building instrumentation into your software, building essentially all the sort of DevOps principles of building stuff that can be deployed quickly, is instrumented, is visible, that very visibility, that knowledge of what you're getting, that Kanbanizing of the software is what helps you build the right thing. So finally, some takeaways. Zone control, I find this fantastically useful. This is from the Doing the Right Thing book. This idea of how do I give visibility of what I'm doing, and if I'm working with other people, how might they give me visibility of what they're doing? Instrumentation and visualization. So that's how we do it in the software, and doing it in the software allows us to make much better decisions about the next pieces of software to deliver. Or gives us an idea of whether our software is really working or not. But in putting all this instrumentation and visualization in place, beware of bad intelligence. So you might look at one data source and make an assumption about something, but actually there's another thing that you're not aware of or you're not looking at, and you need to look beyond the data and have the conversations that are kind of going to help tell you what's really happening, and as a result, then net out a good business decisions. So I'm out of time, but I'm happy to take questions if the clock will allow it.
Can you put the cumulative load over?
Oh yeah, let's see where it's got to. Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back up to that.
I've only got time for one.
Okay, let's do last 15 minutes. See how we're doing. I fully expect it to have. Oh yeah. So it's. This is going down, this one. I made that DD pretty massive, so it's, I think it'll still be hammering the disk when I get home this evening. I'll take a question from the floor if anyone has one. No.
Sorry, what was your solution on to this packaging?
It was to remove the shared dependency. So the shared dependency was completely unneeded. So first of all, we nearly went down the line of spending a lot of money on very expensive provisioned disks And it was by digging into having a whiteboard session around it, thinking about various options, that it became clear that actually that shared dependency should never have been in there in the first place. And all these different processes were all trying to access the same shared NFS. And so we actually said, no, there's no reason for this. There's no need for them to do it. And actually having this shared dependency is actually preventing us from further horizontally scaling the platform. So once we got rid of that, we saved ourselves a huge problem, and we also got scalability into the mix. So it was a great solution. But again, it was rather than kind of taking the data at face value, was using the data to start a conversation, start an investigation. If nothing else, to ask the question, well, what isn't here? What can't I see? Who do I need to be speaking to? But for you guys, with your instrumentation, I would say you're absolutely on the right track, and it's so worth the investment. We use the graph that I had up before, showing the sort of stuff during the day, stuff during the night. That's we have that in our investor deck. So when we go and talk to potential investors, we're talking about how we're not making big investment in CapEx, we're making light investment in OpEx, and we're able to use the instrumentation of the software to inform decisions about that. So it's, as I say, it's Kanban all the way down, it's instrumentation, visibility, but knowing that is not the whole story, and you can never be completely aware of what's going on. And just as in the metrics that we use to track our software delivery, the metrics we get from the software itself need to be the start of a conversation and engagement with all the people involved to get to the right outcome. Thank you very much.